What's shaking? What's popping? What's cracking? Hopefully not your joints. My name is Angela. Thank you so much for checking out this channel at Remnant Life. I wanted to talk about something. You can see my lipstick. I wanted to talk about something that has been like this recurring theme over the past few days, and it has to do with um, relationships and counterfeit relationships. Um, Unfortunately, I've dealt with counterfeit relationships before. I'm sure most people have, right? Um, but the thing that I've been realizing too is that in this day and age, we live in a time where I'm going to use the terms like narcissism and sociopathy and psychopathy, right? We live in a time where those things are becoming more and more normal. And the crazy thing is, the Bible actually tells us that this is going to happen. And so, one thing that God has really been showing me about, I don't even like to talk about my personal dating life or not dating life, whatever, or lack thereof. But um, God has really been taking me through a process of letting me know that He is going to work everything out. He's going to be the one that's going to orchestrate, you know, me meeting my husband and him meeting me. And like, I've just realized that I have to leave it in God's hands. That I just realized that, you know, I consider myself to be a pretty discerning person, but the fact that I have fallen into the trap too, right? Just lets me know that, oh, okay, we really, really, really do have to guard our hearts. Like, I believe it's Proverbs says, right? Guard your heart. What is it? Guard your heart. Guard your heart, for all of life flows from it, or something like that. But it's really true. We do have to guard our heart. And this is the crazy thing. I think we just forget that, like, we do live in a world where there is like a spiritual battle going on. Like, Ephesians 6:12, I believe, says that we don't fight a battle of flesh and blood, right? We fight a battle of spiritual powers of wickedness in high places. And we forget that, these people sometimes are, uh, sometimes, how do I explain it? Right? The verse talks about how we don't fight a battle of flesh and blood, but with our like carnal fleshly eyes, we just see something in front of us and we think, oh, this is flesh and blood, this is a human I'm battling, right? This is just like a thing, I'm just dealing with a human. But the Bible says no, it's not always just it's not just a flesh and blood thing. Sometimes it is a spiritual thing, right? And I've been realizing that the same way that God can use people to bless you, the enemy can use people to um, try to destroy your life, try to distract you, or maybe cause delay. And yeah, and even when it comes to like narcissism and stuff, um, I know the term gets like thrown around a lot, but if you really, really understand like what it actually is, a narcissistic personality disorder, and what the traits are of it, it's literally Second Timothy 3. That's it. That's narcissism in a nutshell. But when it starts, it says, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, right? So just selfish, covetous, so they just want what other people have, right? Boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without, and this is the part that I find very interesting, without natural affection. So instead of being able to share normal feelings or emotions with somebody else, it's like something's off there. It's not natural. Like when you think of even a mother with her baby, right? It's like they have, women are born with like this maternal instinct where we do want to love, our children, and we do want to take care of them and protect them, and like it's a natural affection. But here he's saying that these people, they don't have natural affection. So it's almost like it's a faked affection or a forced affection. They're truce breakers, so they break promises, false accusers. Satan also does that as well. He is known as the great accuser. Um, Incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heedy, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And this is one thing I've noticed. As I don't date anymore, but when I did, I dated a few people who, I thought it was a godly thing. There was one person where I actually thought for a minute that maybe they were my husband, right? And that's why I dated them. But I realized, the more that I got to know them, that, oh, they don't actually love God. They love pleasure more than they love God. They love, and so unfortunately, we live in a world where some people will pretend to be, a God-fearing person because they know that if they say those things, they will get what they want. And so unfortunately, it sucks that we live in a world where people do manipulate and people do prey on emotions. And like, I don't know if anybody like has seen The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, right? Like, and I know it's The Bachelorette, like, but I watched it, okay? And it's crazy because there's this one guy who, in the beginning, he was pursuing her. He was dedicated. He told her he wanted to marry her. They talked about having this future together. And in the end, she ended up picking him, and they both kind of like proposed to each other, right? But as soon as the show ended, he bounced. He was gone. And you realize that all of those things, all of those episodes that you watch where like you think, oh my gosh, because at first I didn't like him, right? But then he started growing on me, but then I wasn't quite sure. But then when he left, I was like, you have to be kidding me. He literally professed his love for this woman on national television and then turned around and said, actually, like, bye, you know? And so even with that, right, you have to be careful. And I don't want to, I'll do a separate video maybe on like narcissism and stuff. But like, love bombing is a thing, right? People will tell you what you want to hear. And so they will make these grand promises, or, they would tell you things that they know you want to hear, and they will do it to get you where they want you, because they don't want you, they want something from you, right? And depending on your situation and who you are, it could be different. Somebody might know that you're rich and they might say, hey, I got to get to this person so I can get the money, right? And so sometimes people will manipulate to try to get money. Sometimes they'll try to manipulate to get sex, right? Whatever it is, it's really unfortunate. And sometimes, and this is like the crazy, I feel like this is crazy too, but sometimes people, they will manipulate just to get validation. That's it. Like they don't actually care about you. They just want validation, right? For themselves, right? Because they have like really low self-esteem, so they need to be built up, right? But anyways, it's so interesting. So it says here, in verse 4, so Second Timothy 2, Second Timothy 3, sorry, I think I said the wrong verse in the beginning. Verses 4, traitors, heedy, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And with me, every time a relationship has ended, it has been because there was this battle between, I want to serve God, right? And this is the thing, the guys would come into the picture and they like, and I wasn't even looking, like the last person that I dated like slid in my DMs, said the right things, like, I want to have a relationship with you where God is going to be at the center, and like I really want us to, follow him. And, like, it was one of those things where like we just started talking and then we didn't stop. And, but then once I really got to know him, I was like, oh, you're not willing to let go of your own selfish desires and wants and actually follow God and do what He's called us to do in a relationship. And so I had to walk away, right? But and so this brings me to verse 5, right? So they have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. And then it says here, from such turn away. So there will be, for men and women, right? There will be men, there will be women who will come up to you, right? And they will show that they are some sort of, that they have a form of godliness, that they know God, right? Or so they say, or that they believe God, or so they say, right? My rabbit. But it's like, but it's crazy because when it actually comes down to being obedient, or when it comes down to um, things like that, it's like they would rather not be obedient. They would rather focus on like themselves, their own selfish pleasures, rather than realizing that, hey, God has called me to do relationships differently. And then this is the part also which is crazy. So this goes back to what I was talking about with the manipulation, right? So it says in verse 6 here, for of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts. So, and I was thinking about this too. So it talks about how these men are intentionally creeping into women's houses to lead women astray. But it says with diverse lusts. So there's different things that they're using to lure these women away. And I don't think that's always, because here when it says lusts, we just think of like, like, what's the word? We just think of like sexual immorality, right? But it says lusts with an S. And so I'm like, oh, are there other things that it's talking about too? So, for example, like I was saying before, like maybe money, or maybe, a promise of like, I don't know, a sense of security, whatever it is for people, right? It's like, it's crazy because you have to be careful. Because I think about, there's stories of people that I know, and I can't say their names, but I know of somebody who, you know, ended up marrying somebody who was not a good person, but that person basically lied about who they were, lied about being a Christian, and used their money to convince that person to marry them, and said, I will take care of you, and I have all, this person had millions of dollars, right? And so that other person eventually did end up marrying that person, and their whole life fell apart. It was like Samson and Delilah, right? Just how Delilah used like her lust, right, to lure Samson for the sake of his demise. Like, and again, even with that, it wasn't true love. It was a counterfeit love, right? And it even said that Samson loved Delilah, but it never anywhere said that Delilah loved Samson, right? And her goal was to like get him to like finally profess his whole heart to her, and in doing so tell the truth about like what his weakness was, what was like, what's the thing that'll take away his strength, right? And so again, going back to the verse about how we have to guard our hearts, right? It's true, because I do think about stories like Samson and Delilah, and I'm just like, you know, sometimes a person can come to you and look like everything you want, and you think it's everything you want. And unfortunately, if, and again, if something is packaged a certain way, and you just see the outside, you don't know yet, right? Like what's really going on with the person. And so it does take time and prayer and God to reveal these things to you. But we just have to be careful, because again, in the last days, perilous times shall come, right? And it's saying in the last days, we're going to see an increase in these things. That these things that maybe have been like, off and on here and there throughout like, different decades, it's like, no, in the last times, this is going to be the norm. And yeah, and then in verse 7 too, even with people who again profess to be believers and profess to, love God, in verse 7 says they're ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And then it says, so do these also resist the truth, men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. And so, there's been this constant theme with this coming up, and even me in the past, right? I've dated somebody who, did all the right things, said, well, not all the right things, but they, but they were, wanting to go to church and read the Bible and all these things. And, at the time, oh my goodness, I just, oh, now that I look at it, now I know, and now I can see these things. But, and this was quite a while ago, but, you know, we just have to be careful when people tell us what we want to hear. And we always have to kind of just like pray about things, right? Because there's even that, I think it's also in Proverbs where it talks about flattery too. And again, we have to be careful with flattery because people use it, narcissists use it, and psychopaths and stuff, right? They use it to love bomb people to get their victims to feel a certain way so that there's this like in a romantic setting, right? It's so they have this whirlwind romance and everything happens so fast. And oh my gosh, I just know. And I fell for this person and they fell for me. And right. And sometimes we have to be careful when things seem a little too good to be true because unfortunately they can be sometimes. And I feel like God, when He brings our person to us, He knows what we need. And that's the crazy thing. Like, even with me, God has been like literally changing my desires and my wants and like the things that I thought I wanted in a relationship. And He's been like, okay, this is what you want. This is what you need, though. Like, I got you, though. This is what you need. And, when God starts like, changing that and He starts showing you something else, then you're like, oh, that is so much better. That is like, that makes so much sense, right? And, when we let God orchestrate these things and when we let God bring our person to us, right? We also know that it's not just about, having those, emotions. And obviously it's nice, right? That we love being in relationships and like, yes, being able to hold someone's hand and, you know, those are like beautiful moments. But, but marriage is so much bigger than that. Marriage is such a serious commitment and covenant, between you, that person, and God. And, God knows that like when He brings you your person, He knows that it's for kingdom work. He know like there's a reason for it, right? Like you're going to be able to help someone with something, they're going to be able to help you with something or whatever it is, right? But God knows what that is and He knows what the strengths and the weaknesses are of both people. And like he knows best. And unfortunately, I think about me and there's been times where I thought I knew best and I thought like, even my list, I'm realizing now like, you know, I've even said to God, like, you pick him. Like these are the characteristics I want and I'm very attracted to, and I would very much like this, but you can pick him. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, I'm not dating, I'm not searching. I'm just chilling, being an introvert, which I don't mind. I love having my alone time anyways, but it's just like in the right time, He will make it happen, right? And He will bring the right person. And it's not going to be stressful. It's not going to be this like crazy, thing where you're in a state of fight or flight. Like, that's not normal. If you're in a relationship where like something feels off, listen to that because it could save your life. I was in an abusive relationship and when my ex came into my life, I was actually dealing with a chronic illness at the time. And at this time, uh, my symptoms were so bad that I couldn't really like walk or do much. And so I actually had a wheelchair. And when my ex came into the picture, he said all the right things. And he was like, oh, like I'm a nurse and I can, wheelchair you around the park. And I was like, at the time, because I didn't have other people who were doing those things for me, and I felt very isolated and I felt very alone, because somebody was willing to do that, I was just like, oh, amazing. Right. And then I didn't realize until later, which is what happens unfortunately sometimes, that this person was not the person for me. And it was abusive, it was toxic. Um, but I feel like if I was to have actually prayed really hard about it in the beginning and actually really sought God's face, He would have told me it was a no. But sometimes I think we forget to bring everything to God, and I mean everything. Like, even again, like if you do have someone who's pursuing you, right? It's like bring that person to God and be like, God, what do you think about this? Like, is this from you? Is this not from you? And I feel like God will work things out in such a way where like you will have peace and that person will have peace. And I feel like God will make it so that both people eventually know, right? They both will know that, like, it may be different time periods, it may not happen the same time, but I feel like both people will know that they are supposed to be with the other person. And again, doesn't mean it's going to happen for both people at the same time, but I feel like if it really is a God thing, it's not just going to be one person who's really, really pushing it, and then the other person's like, right? And I mean, granted, sometimes that does happen, and sometimes it takes a while for the other person to actually really, like become attracted to the other person, or maybe they just saw them as a friend, and maybe God does change their heart, and then they are seeing them with new eyes, and so that does happen sometimes. But we do just have to be careful of like trying to make things work that just don't, and if it doesn't work, don't force it, right? Because there are, like I said, there are a lot of manipulative people these days, who, again, they want to just get what they want, right? And they will do whatever they have to do to get that. So whether it's lying, whether it's being charming and flattering, and using flattery, you know they will do these things, and again, without natural affection, it's not actual compliments coming from the heart, right? um but then I also think about it too, and I'm like, well, if this is something that's going to happen in like the last days, why is it a last days thing? And then I think about Matthew 24, I think it's Matthew 24, where the disciples are asking Jesus about like the end of the age, right? And um there's a part in there where he talks about, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. So basically saying, because sin is going to increase and increase and increase, right? What happens when there's like, just like, real talk, just think about it. What happens when more sin enters the world, right? Trauma. More trauma. More sin equals more trauma. More trauma equals more mental health issues. More mental health issues means more narcissists, more sociopaths, more psychopaths. And it's unfortunate, and I'm not saying we have to just like judge, these people or whatever who are narcissists and stuff. But what I'm saying is sometimes God actually wants to protect us from them, because there is a spiritual war, and the enemy does use people to try to derail you, to try to distract you, to get you off track. And that's what happened with my dad and my mom. My dad was in Bible college to become a pastor. um, he was very passionate about that. He met my mom, kind of like a Samson and Delilah situation. And yeah, he met my mom. They ended up dating. She said she was a Christian, but she wasn't. And over the period of time that they were together, his life basically got ruined. And but then him as a Christian, he was just trying to make things work because they got married and they had a kid. And so he was actually trying to do like the right thing, but he was doing it with the wrong person. And because it was the wrong person, it just wasn't, no matter what he would do, or no matter how much counseling they would take, nothing would help their issues. Because you can't work things out with a person who doesn't understand how to be selfless. And so again, the second Timothy 3 chapter is all about selfishness, right? And, God is calling us as believers, right, to be selfless in the things that we do, in the love that we show other people, and even especially in our relationships and romantic relationships, right? The whole point is for two people to come together who are both selfless and they both want to serve the other person. And well, people are going to have their moments and their days where, maybe it's not like 100% there, but like that's the goal though, right? And I feel like God can work with that. But if you have one person who is selfless and one person who is selfish, the selfish person, the narcissist, right, or the sociopath or the psychopath, the selfish person will take from the selfless one, the giver, right? So you do have to be careful, because if you are with somebody like this, right, the narcissist, you can go through hell with that person. And if honestly, real, like guys, real talk, I am saying this to you to warn you just because of what I've gone through, okay? Like the things that I've gone through, I would not recommend to anyone. And there's a reason why I am content being single right now, because I'm not willing to put myself in another situation like that ever again, ever. And and again, I'm letting God pick my spouse. I'm not pushing it. I'm not, in the right time, it'll happen when he knows I'm ready for it. And I know he already has been kind of changing my heart posture in a lot of different ways. And even when it comes to marriage and stuff like that too, there's a lot of things I've kind of wondered about. And I feel like lately God's been really kind of asking me, okay, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And so those things are coming up more. And I do also realize that, the more the counterfeits try to come into the picture, I'm like, why are they trying to come into the picture? Does that mean my husband is out there and that they're trying to distract me so that I don't find him or I don't connect with him? Because again, like, so just be careful with these people. And even again, Samson and Delilah, right? Like she led to his literal like death in the end, right? She took his strength away from him and she sold him out for money. And again, it goes back to the whole, lovers of themselves, right? She did it for the money. All she cared about was herself. She didn't actually care about Samson. And if you really want to contrast, 2 Timothy 3 versus what actual love is, you just go to 1 Corinthians 13. And 1 Corinthians 13 is all about what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, right? um and when you look at that versus this, it's already so different. Patience and kindness, that's not something you're going to see in somebody who's incredibly selfish, right? And so I feel like even if you're, this is something that I don't know, in the past I've done this, right? But like even when I was interested in somebody, I would kind of look at 1 Corinthians 13 and I'd be like, okay, is this person patient or are they wanting to rush, right? Um, and even rush like physical intimacy and stuff, right? Like, are they really believers? Or like again, 2 Timothy 3 verses 4, or are they just lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, right? Because there's a big distinction there. And I feel like, especially in this day and age too, everybody says they're a Christian, everybody says, that they want to live for him. But then when push comes to shove, Like, and for me as a female, you know, in the past, when I've asked Christian men, are you willing to wait even just for intimacy, right? It's always, oh, I don't think I could do that. Like, and it's like, oh, interesting. I thought you were a Christian. Um, yeah, so this is kind of just like a little warning, just because of what I've gone through. I've seen other people go through it. Again, it was broadcast on TV with the whole bachelorette situation. Like, um, and it just really goes to show you that, like, this is such an issue in this day and age. And I just feel like, and I'm not telling you not to, like, be open or to look. Like, God is like, he works differently with all of us in regards to how he's going to bring us our spouses, right? Some people are long distance, some people go to the same church, some people are childhood friends, some people, it's different, right, for everybody. But and some people do meet online, right? And so I'm not telling you not to do these, like, don't do online dating or anything. If God tells you to, go nuts, right? I just know for me, I won't do it. I won't. I know God has better, and I know, yeah, I just know he has better. Um, but yeah, I'm just trying to think of if there's any other thoughts I have on this. Because what else was I talking about? But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If anything, just let this message just give you that extra, like, I guess, clarity, so that maybe if you are dating, you can really, really pray and actually ask God about the person that you're talking to, and so that you can get that confirmation from God, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're with somebody who's pretending to be somebody that they're not. And again, like, I know somebody who's having to go through a whole divorce now because of it, and it's just devastating. And it's just really sad because when, unfortunately, when you're dealing with somebody like this, who, because there's a difference between being selfish and being a narcissist, right? Everybody can be selfish every once in a while because we're human, right? But it's like, if you're actually a narcissist, it's like you have to be careful, because oftentimes, those relationships are abusive, right? And it's just because of the dynamic again, right? Somebody wants to take, and then the other person is the giver. And so, usually it's an empath, for lack of a better term, right? It's somebody who, is caring, is compassionate, and then the narcissist will take advantage of that. And to the point where they don't care if they destroy your life. They don't care, if they destroy, say you have a child with a narcissist. They don't care if they hurt your children. They don't care. And it's just really sad, because I've met so many women too, just because of, I feel like, I've had to do, like, activism in, like, so many different ways. And I'm just like, God, I'm like, no more. um, but even when it comes to, like, domestic abuse and things like that, I lost everything, to the point where, there were moments where it's like the person was almost making me go crazy. And it reminds me of what I was reading the other day in, Judges, actually. Let me grab it here. It's about Samson and Delilah. Let me just get it, because it's funny, because Delilah, so she, her and Samson are, like, hanging out, right? And she again is trying to figure out his weakness so she can get money, right? But the thing that's interesting is, Samson, he keeps lying to her at first, and he's like, oh, this is going to make me weak. And then they try something, and he's not weak. And then she'll ask him again, you lied to me, right? But the thing that I find very interesting, um, hang on a second here, but the thing that I find very interesting is that near the end of their communication, like before the whole downfall of Samson, she starts emotionally manipulating him, right? And so, again, going back to the whole manipulation thing, whether it's lies, flattery, whatever, but even with narcissists too, they will try to manipulate your emotions to make you feel bad. And again, if you're already somebody who's like a carer and you give and you love people and you just like you want the best for people, they will take advantage of that, and they can turn things around to make you do something that you don't even want to do. And so with Samson and Delilah here in verses. Okay, yeah. So in verses like 15 and onwards, this is where she starts like the emotional manipulation and like the guilt tripping, right? And so in verse 15, so sorry, this is Judges 16 verses 15 and onwards. And she said unto him, so this is Delilah, how can thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Because he didn't tell her the truth about what makes him weak, right? And so now she's using the love and she's weaponizing that again and saying, you don't even love me because you're not telling me everything, right? And so she goes, thou hast mocked me these 3 times and has not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And then verses 16, it says, and it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words. It was a daily occurrence. She was nonstop asking, right? And it says that, and she urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death. It was so much that he wanted to die. And so these people, they will do things like that. They will, oh, what's my rabbit doing? Happy? No, no, sir. No, sir. I love you, but no, sir. We don't bite cords. But yeah, even with here, it's like it's the constant pestering. And if you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, that's the dynamic of the whole relationship. It's constantly being, whether it's belittled, whether nothing you do is ever good enough, whether, I don't know, right? Again, whether it's gaslighting, making you feel like you're crazy by trying to make you doubt your own reality, again, manipulation, all these things. But it got to him to the point where he finally just told her, because he's like, I can't deal with this anymore. I can't take it. This lady won't leave me alone. And then in verse 17, that he told her all his heart. And he said unto her, there has not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. And so after all this, like after all the stuff she does, then he tells her, right? And then it leads to his downfall, right? And then he ends up dying in the end. But it's just crazy because, you know, this is the thing. It's like when people come into our lives, right? Even with me, like I'm very prayerful about it too. And like there's times, even when I started doing the Instagram lives, right? Even now, my page is still private just because there's certain people that I don't want looking at my Instagram page. And one of those people is, a narcissist, and I don't want that. But when I was starting to grow in not popularity, that's not the right word, but when I was starting to like grow a bit, because I just so happened to get connected to people who had big platforms, and then they would have me on their lives. And so what would happen is their friends started adding me on Instagram. And even though it's great to be able to reach a lot of people, this is something I still struggle with and still wrestle with, and this is part of my struggle with doing YouTube, just because I'm very aware that you can't necessarily control who's going to see your videos, right? But even with that, when I was doing the Instagram lives, I was having random people add me, and a lot of them, like, I just had gut feelings about, and I was like, no, I don't trust this person. I don't trust this person either. But because, like, and this is the thing, if you do start to grow a bit, you get a lot of good followers and you can make amazing friendships, but you do also get some sketchy people who will follow you and who maybe don't have the best intentions either. And so, it got to a point where I was just like, I don't want all this attention. I don't want just random people who are, maybe involved in certain things. I don't want them on my page. I don't want them cursing me and stuff. And so, and again, and I think maybe just because of like where I've come from, I'm a little more sensitive to this than most people. Like, I do really understand that curses are a thing, that witches do it, they still exist. There's warlocks that do it, they still exist. And so I am very cautious about like protecting my peace and guarding my heart from, people who may have what's the word? Who may have bad intent, right? Um and so again, coming to YouTube, it's like, wow, this is a whole different world where like I can't just have a private page. I can make my videos private if I want, but it kind of defeats the whole purpose of doing YouTube. But um but I say all that to say, like, you do have to be careful, not everybody who says that they love you or care about you does. And it's really sad that I even have to say that. It's sad that like we're living in a day and an age where this is even a thing, that people lie about loving somebody else. Like, this is so crazy to me because I'm like, why go through all the work? Why go through all the heartache and lie? Just that, like, it doesn't make any sense to me. But I also understand that again, we do live in a world where the battle is not always flesh and blood and against flesh and blood, right? Sometimes it is against, principalities. And I think of even like Judas and stuff, right? Before he betrayed Jesus, it literally said that like Satan entered him, like Satan himself entered him. So Satan was using him to sell Jesus out for money. And the same way that that happened in that situation, I feel like you can't tell me that like that can't happen in other situations where like the enemy is using people to accomplish nefarious things too. It happens all the time, right? And even when I just think about like this world, right? Like, there's so much corruption. And even like Ecclesiastes talks about, like, the more knowledge you have, the more sorrow you get when you really start to understand like how this world operates and how evil it actually is, and like, about things that are like actually going on in this world, and like kids that are being trafficked and stuff. It's like evil people have to be willing to do these things, right? Like, it's not like just a random Joe Smo could like do something like that, right? Because I feel like most people do still have that conviction, like some sort of moral compass, even if it's relative morality versus objective morality, right? Most, not all, because I feel like times are changing and good is being classified as evil and evil is being normalized as good. But I feel like, most, maybe not even most, I feel like maybe I'm being very generous, but I would say like a lot of people would not be comfortable doing things like that because they understand this is not right. This is going to lead to somebody else being hurt. This is crazy. Like, but again, it's one of those things where it's like we do live in a world where like these people, right, they do exist. And so we just have to be so careful. So, like, if I can just urge you with anything, it is just to protect your heart, protect yourself. Just like, just really make sure that, like, if you are talking to someone or seeing someone, that you take that to God, that, like, you ask for confirmation in the word, that like you ask for even confirmation, like in other ways, right? Like there's things you can say between you and God that only God knows. And, He can reveal even certain things to, the person you're talking to or whatever, right? Because, I feel like, especially for women, I just feel like relationships are one of those tools that like the enemy can really use to cause, a lot of damage. And I feel like, men and women, we have similar struggles, but also different struggles. And I feel like men, like there's other ways for men that I feel like the enemy can, what's the word? That he can lead to a lot of destruction too, but it may not necessarily be like relationally like that. It may not, it's not like the same thing. And I think maybe because of how we're wired, and how men are more visual and how women are more emotional, it makes sense that the enemy seems to use relationships for women. And then for men, he seems to use things like, porn or whatever else it is, right? Not that I'm saying women don't struggle with that, but you know, it's just interesting, right? And so we do just have to be very cautious. We have to be on guard. We have to just like realize that this is the world we're living in. And if we are in the end times as well, like if we really are there, then we want to make sure we're with the right person, because the right person, if we're hearing from God and if we're always asking for like instructions from God, we want to be with somebody who's also going to hear from God and who's also going to ask for instructions too. And then when you're together, you guys can both ask for directions from God and say, okay, what does God want us to do together, right? Where does God want us to go? Where, right? Whatever it may be. But it's like, you need to be with somebody, especially in those times, who's going to be able to be almost like a rock, right? Um, and the same way you should be willing to be a rock too, because if it is true that we are in the end times, and if things are going to ramp up and get crazier, and if persecution gets worse and worse, I just think about like what happens in China and stuff. And, even there's a book, I've talked about it before, but it's called Clay in the Potter's Hand, and it's amazing. I remember when I read that, I think, a teenager when I read that book, but it like changed my perspective on marriage forever, because the things that they both went through. The author, her name is Dorothy Sun, but she was living in China at the time, and at the time you weren't allowed to be a Christian, and she was part of this like home church, ministry, and somebody from her group ended up like ratting them out to the government. The government came in and basically took them all to like, um, these labor camps. And at these labor camps, they had opportunities to deny their faith and they would be set free and they could go back home. And, Dorothy did not sign the papers, and she went through like health stuff there. She was there for a long time. But in the middle of all this crazy stuff, like, I believe, I have to read the book again because it's been a while, but I believe she left. She met her husband. They got married. They had a crazy wedding. She didn't even have like a wedding dress. She wore a green dress. They didn't have like a bed. They just had a mattress on the floor. But they didn't care because they knew that God called them to be together, and they knew that like they were going to do ministry together. And so they get married. They have a few friends come to the little wedding in a house. It's not like at any fancy place, it's literally in like the living room. And they get married, and then they both get sent to camps again. But this time they get separated. And she's in one camp, he's in another one. They're separated for years at this point. And and she's talking about all the things she's going through and how God is shaping her and molding her in this process, but also how she's like praying for her husband while she's in like the concentration camp. And then you find out he was praying for her while he was away, like, and then God just so happens to make them meet up again. Because you have to remember, they were in this camp for like years that they couldn't see each other, they couldn't communicate to one another, they couldn't write letters. And, God just happened to work it out in such a way where like he brought them back together again and they were able to be together. But like, yeah, the whole thing's crazy. When I read that book, I was like, oh, I was like, okay. I was like, that sounds kind of crazy, but like, kind of sounds fun, in the sense that, like, being a believer is not easy. And you just gotta, it's one of those things too, where it's like, find someone who's okay suffering with you. Because there's gonna be moments, and this is what I'm learning too. There's gonna be moments, even when you're, with your person and when you're married, that like, maybe you guys are struggling one month financially and maybe you can't eat the best food, right? It's like, are you going to be okay having like ramen noodles for like a few weeks, right? It's like, I don't know, I think the things that we think matter about marriage don't really matter. And then things that actually do matter, we don't really talk about very much. And yeah, I didn't even want to do a video on relationships, but this theme has just been coming up over and over and over again. Like, it's crazy. Yeah, but I do say all that to say that like God really does love us. And like, if we think something is good in our mind and in our like sight, like if we think something's good, how much better is what God has for us? Like, again, this is us trying to make decisions, thinking we know best and thinking we know what we need and what we want, right? And then God says, actually, I know what you need. This is what you need, right? And, even with me, there's things that I'm realizing I had like, there's things where I'm like, okay, this is not important at all. And even, how sometimes you may have a certain type too, right? God has just been like telling me no. Like, you know, um, yeah, he's definitely been humbling me and just, yeah, I don't know. He's just been humbling me. And I just feel like if you can be with somebody where you can love them in the middle of hard times and you guys can both kind of suffer together in a way that is where you guys are both still showing gratitude and appreciation and love for one another and for God, right? In the middle of those things, I feel like nothing can break you up. The enemy will probably try, but I feel like, if both people can already understand what it's like to go through hard times and then they can go through it together, it's like, ooh, it's like they good, you know? And yeah, and even ladies, like just, woman to woman, right? Um, just don't feel like you have to do things to keep a man. If you feel like you have to do things to keep a man, he's not your man. he's he's not your man, right? Love is patient. Love is kind. People, if you're with a guy who's trying to force you to sleep with him, because really it's what he wants at the end of the day, right? Is that being patient? Is that being kind? Or is it being self-seeking, right? Um, so yeah, just remember that, you know, life is literally too short. And if you do end up with the wrong person, you can waste a long time, or you can waste a lot of time that you can't get back. You really can't. And I just feel like there's certain lessons that, are so painful that like I would rather just tell you these things so that nobody ends up in a situation like that where they're in a toxic relationship or where they are being, abused, right? And it's just, I feel like if we let God really guide us and lead us, then he'll pick the best person for us. But that also means that we have to wait and we have to be patient and we can't just like sometimes God's plans and his design for our life is completely different than what we might think. And so, because God has a different plan, he knows the right time. He knows the right season. He knows the right, you know. So it's yeah, so just remember that like God, he's got you. He's literally got you in the palm of his hand. And he's got your spouse in the palm of, his hand too. And in the right time, he'll bring you to that person. Don't feel like you have to rush. Don't feel it. I feel like that's a red flag, right? And even when it comes back to like the whole narcissist thing too, right? A lot of times they will love bomb you, right? And they will try to rush things because they want to get you to be in a relationship with them before their mask falls off. Because it's like it's an act, right? Like we were reading about in 2 Timothy 3. It's an act. It's not natural affection. It's faked and forced affection. And so they know they can't keep up with it forever. So what they do is they try to rush, 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 marry you fast, date you right away, tell you I love you right away, to try to get you to emotionally bond with them and just be stuck. And then when the mask falls off and you find out who they really are, you're married to them now. So you just have to be so careful. And yeah, I feel like I was gonna say something else and I don't remember now. It's gone. God, do you want me to say it? Bring it back if you want me to say it. But I guess for the most part, but with all that said, that's pretty much it. I don't really have anything else to add at this point. Um, Not that I can think of, anyways. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think so. But yeah, so I'm gonna leave it at that then. Yeah, just take everything to the Lord in prayer and just guard your heart, protect your heart. Don't just jump into a relationship because you're single or because the right person or you think it's the right person, right? Just like it's okay to wait and to see. I have like a slogan that I always use for like relationships, and I always say like time will tell, right? Like time will tell. Time always reveals a person's character, right? You can't necessarily see that in like 3 months, right? But if you've been with somebody long enough and if you've seen them when they've had like bad days, and if you've seen when, you know, their tire blows out and you see how they react and how they are when they're angry, when you get to see these like see them in these tough spaces, I feel like okay, if you've seen them over and over in tough situations and they're not like violent and all the okay, that's good, right? But like if there are red flags, right, then it's like listen to those things. And even our gut too, I feel like the Holy Spirit, he's so good in the sense that like he will let us know when something is not right. And I feel like for me, there's been times where he has given me like just this gut feeling of like, something's not right. Something's not right. You can't trust this person. And every time he has shown me why I shouldn't trust that person because something would usually happen and then they would expose themselves. And then I was like, oh my goodness. But like, just listen to that nudging too of the Holy Spirit. If you do have a gut feeling where something feels off, listen to it. Don't ignore it. If God is telling you no, don't ignore it. Um, because I promise you, all of the things that you think you can get in these relationships, if it's not your godly person, it's not going to be worth it. It's not going to be enjoyable because if you really love God and you believe him, in the back of your mind, you're always going to know that like it's not it, right? And even if, especially too, if you're like in sin in your relationship, right? Like that's not That's not where God wants you to be. And even with that, it's like, I promise you, it'll get old. It's not going to be fun. You're probably going to get sick of it. And then what, right? And then you just have all these other open doors, right? So it's like, again, just really, really be careful. And I'm not saying this from a place of judgment or condemnation, because I have been in, I've made some poor choices relationally, right, in the past. And, you know, I've learned from that now, and I feel like, the next person that I date at this point, like, it's my husband. It's my husband, you know? Yeah. So, anyways, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to try to edit this. But I hope this was helpful. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you again for checking out the channel. Bye. Love you, beautiful people.